Servus Männer, it's Red Pill Germany again. Lately I have been talking a lot about faraway exotic places and these wonderful people, but now I want to talk about Germany. As most of you know, of course, we have an election in 1 month. Our federal parliament, the Bundestag, will be elected once again, and a coalition that can have a majority in parliament then will determine then who is to be the next chancellor. In the last weeks, a lot has been moving in the polls. There was a dramatic change, and this is all due to media coverage. It is so interesting how these normie people are really responding to everything that the mainstream media say. If you look at the votes for the FDP, for the Linke, and for the AfD, those are, I would say, less centrist normie people. In the case of the FDP, these are people who are well off most of the time, and they have a clear agenda and they are convinced of that party because it is good for them. The same with Die Linke. They are communists, and why would they vote for anything else but the renamed version of the Eastern German Unity Party, SED. Now with the AfD, there are some protest voters. You can see, for example, that in 2018 they were doing a lot better in the polls, and these were not convinced AfD voters that left now. I think these were just angry protest voters, and you have also some of them, and most of them do not vote for them or say that they will vote for them when they are polled right now. So these parties are more or less, or to a lesser degree, unaffected by the current news and the current framing, because you have to understand that all the media channels and all the newspapers, they are reporting and framing in the same way, and there are these campaigns where they say, oh, now we have to push Baerbock, oh, now we have to write something bad about her, oh, now we have to expose Laschet for the weakling that he actually is. And the normies, or these aggressive centrists, whatever you want to call them, they are flipping back and forth between the union parties, CDU, CSU, between the Green Party and the SPD. Those three parties, I would say, are hardcore normie parties by now. And you can see that they more or less share a pool of potential voters. And these guys are, as I said, flipping and cycling back and forth in their decision, just dependent on how the media coverage is at the moment. And you can see if one of these three parties goes down, another one goes up. It is really very clear to see from the polling alone what is happening here. So what do we have? When people earlier this year were still so afraid of the pandemic, of course, the union parties with Södolf in Bavaria were doing pretty well because he promised them protection and safety. But then the Green Party became more successful as that went away. And the Green Party actually overtook the CDU, and that went pretty fast, because in former times the voters of the SPD or the Green Party or the CDU, they were rather set in their ways. They were actually convinced of their party, and it was very hard to dissuade them or to convince them to vote for another party. They were traditional voters, like their parents already voted for the SPD and they identify as German workers or working class, or in the other sense, CDU voters, they see themselves as Christian and conservative and what have you, so it would be absolutely inconceivable for them to all of a sudden vote SPD. But nowadays, in 2021, that has changed completely. There is this amorphous soup of normies, and they just pick whatever party is seen by them in the center and which is praised by the media, or which is attacked to a lesser degree by the media. That seems to be the only criterion, and they are not loyal to any of these parties anymore. So then a lot of things have been uncovered about the Green Party candidate. It was seen, it was revealed, it turned out that she, just as I said, is not the ideal candidate. Mr. Habeck would have been the way better candidate because he can speak at least in correct complete sentences, and in his closet there are less skeletons to be found compared to Frau Baerbock. So then the Green Party fell from grace, and people were looking for other options. It looked like the CDU could actually gain back these normies that didn't want to vote for a plagiarist who has problems saying one full straight sentence in German. But then it started raining real bad, and just like almost every year we had a flood, and the media decided to cover that in great detail. Now don't get me wrong, for the people who were affected this is horrible, but just like in the 80s and the 90s, it was also horrible back then. But then, of course, they hyped this as a climate event, even though we have these floods all the time. Now, unfortunately for Mr. Laschet, the chancellor candidate of the CDU, he is the governor of North Rhine-Westphalia, my favorite German state. And a lot of the water damage, a lot of the flooding damage was in that state. And then he was filmed around the clock, how he was, in rubber boots, being there on site, inspecting all the damage, talking to the angry people, trying to convince them that he will help them and promised them aid, but there wasn't any aid coming, or at least not as fast and as unbureaucratically as the affected people wished for. And then he made the grave mistake of laughing in the background as our president, Mr. Steinmeier, gave a very grave and stately speech. And just in the background you could see Mr. Laschet snigger, and some camera caught that. And that was blown out of proportion then, because Mr. Laschet didn't even know what Steinmeier was talking about. He didn't listen. It was his turn to speak later or something. And to be fair, if you have events all day, probably you start joking a little bit to pass the time. I don't know. This is not the worst thing ever, but of course the media was jumping on that. And also, to be fair, one has to say, if you are playing at this very high league of politics, you should not make these mistakes when there are a lot of cameras and microphones around, and when you are at a disaster site that you are making jokes. So that was absolutely unprofessional, and while of course he didn't mean to be disrespectful, then the CDU dropped in the polls. And you can see that these triggers, these reasons are not really relevant for the question, is that a good chancellor? Okay, in the case of Baerbock, you have to give speeches. You also should be educated, intelligent, and you should play by the rules. At least you shouldn't get caught. And she did get caught a lot of times with her CV and with her academic career. I covered all that, right? So yes, this is kind of relevant, and also you need tact, and in the case of Laschet, you need to be aware of your role in the public, and that little things and little gestures can have a huge effect. So it is relevant in a way, but it hasn't anything to do with their program, like what tax plans they have or how they want to save and reform the German retirement system and the immigration situation and whatsoever. Foreign policy, it has nothing to do with these hard policy issues. And then there is the SPD. They were not doing very well for a long time. They used to have like 40-30%, and now they're more like 15%. But that changed now. And the reason is that Mr. Scholz is the vice chancellor under Merkel, and he is the minister for finances. And that is basically the most powerful position in a government. And he was just quietly campaigning, no scandals that came to light. There are a lot of scandals, but the media chooses to ignore them or not scandalize them in a way that they did with the other two. And the scandals of Mr. Scholz, I actually talked about that a year ago. It is connected to the Warburg family. The Warburg Bank is a bank from Hamburg, and this very German family is running this bank for a long time. Now, Warburg sounds so German, it sounds like Warsteiner. So I'm sure that the Warburg family, they are the most German people you could find. Like, they must be blonde and tall because they're from Hamburg, right? They're basically Scandinavians, right? And I covered that in detail, and I will probably make another video once again with the upcoming events. Just the short version is that the Bank of Warburg, just like many other German and European banks, were involved in a scandal that is called the cum-ex business or the cum-ex deals. And that means that these banks were speculating with stocks around the time in spring when the dividends are being paid. And what they did then is that they went to the German tax authorities and they claimed that they paid dividend taxes 20 times per stock with a, an accounting trick or something like that. That was very commonplace, but absolutely illegal, of course. So they basically got a refund of taxes that they never paid. And with one single stock, they could do that many dozens of times. And you can imagine how many millions you can create out of thin air, basically. Well, it's not thin air. It comes from the state. So it is ripping off the German taxpayer with a stock accounting trick. They were directly getting German taxpayers' money to their private bank accounts. And the family of Warburg was highly involved in that, of course. At the time, the current mayor or governor of Hamburg, Mr. Tschentscher, was finance senator, so finance minister in Hamburg under the mayor or governor Olaf Scholz. And what they did then is, and this is under debate right now, if they or what their role actually was and how directly they intervened, but let's just say under their leadership, the city of Hamburg decided when the Bank of Warburg went to them and said, hey, look, we don't want to pay these taxes back, because the finance authorities from Cologne, I think it was, the higher office or something, they went to them in Hamburg and said, hey, look, you have to demand these 40 millions back, otherwise you will not get them anymore. There was apparently a statute of limitation or something, so they had to hurry. And the city of Hamburg decided, we don't want this stolen tax money back. The Bank of Warburg, our great friends, they should keep it. And then afterwards, Warburg donated to the Social Democratic Party in Hamburg. Yeah, that was a very nice detail about this case. Yeah, so Mr. Scholz, will he become the Warburg Chancellor? And this is, in my opinion, a huge scandal. And also, as finance minister, he is responsible for the Wirecard scandal, where the German government was turning a blind eye pretty much on these nefarious acts that were going on at the Wirecard company. Huge fraud case, and the authorities looked the other way. And Scholz is also responsible for that. But somehow the German media refuses to report about that. I mean, it's behind a paywall, it's a really small article, none of their names can be seen in the headline and stuff. Last year, even Die Zeit, they were reporting on that, and this is when I told you, but that was a year ago. The German normie doesn't remember that anymore, of course. So if you would ask around, if you would conduct a poll, who actually connects Mr. Scholz's name with the Bank of Warburg and with the cum-ex scandal, I think only 1% of Germans would even know about that. So that is how Mr. Scholz and his SPD could soar in the polls by just flying under the radar and for some reason being left alone by the media, while the Green Party under Baerbock was criticized and came under fire by the media, and Mr. Laschet and his CDU, of course, also. And this is why this amorphous soup of unaffiliated normie voters is now looking for the SPD of all parties to give their vote to. Absolutely ridiculous. No other party has sold out the working class that much in Germany, and no other party is spitting in the faces of the working family and the little guy as much as the SPD does. But just because the media coverage is not that bad at the moment, that is enough for these low information morons to vote or potentially vote for the SPD. So these middle class bug people have the attention span of a fruit fly, and they have the political sense and awareness of a toddler. Just like a liquid that is poured into a glass vessel, they just follow exactly the direction and the hints that they are given by mass media. These are exactly the clowns who on Monday morning or during breakfast break at work or what have you, they are repeating almost verbatim the headlines of Der Spiegel or of the newspaper that they read, the mainstream news. And when the mainstream news presents someone in a bad light, they don't like this guy anymore. And if some party is said to be evil, we don't want to have anything to do with these people. And if the media praises someone or makes a fluff piece about, like they did with the Green Party earlier, then, we would consider voting for the Green Party this time. It seems like they're not that bad. Alright, so I want to wrap this up now. This is to give you an update of what is happening in Germany and why I think at least this is happening. So let me know what you think about that in the comments down below. Like, share and subscribe. Check me out on my alt tech platforms especially. And if you want to see more content like that and if you want to support my work, feel free to support me via Patreon or Subscribestar. Servus, Kameraden.